A racist police officer points his gun at a Muslim man, but he had no idea that Zohran Mamdani was watching the entire scene. We have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers by the end of this month. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and become part of our dream too. The siren hooped once, short, sharp, enough to slice through the evening noise of Queens. Cars along 34th Street slowed, brake lights blooming red as a patrol cruiser slid in behind a dented gray sedan. Inside the sedan, Amir Rahim tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His Uber app was still open on the dashboard, the little route line frozen mid-ride. He'd just dropped off a passenger and was heading home to his wife and baby when the lights flashed behind him. His heart began to pound with a rhythm he knew too well, one he'd inherited from a lifetime of stories. Men who looked like him, with names like his, pulled over just to check. He signaled, eased over to the curb, and killed the engine. The street around him went on as normal, buses hissing, music leaking from open shop doors, but inside the car, time shrank to the sound of his own breathing. Across the street, leaving a tenant meeting at a local community center, Zohran Mamdani noticed a flash of red and blue. He was used to seeing police stops, they were part of the city's constant hum. But something about this one snagged his attention. The gray sedan looked painfully ordinary, the kind hundreds of immigrant drivers used to pay rent one ride at a time. He watched as the patrol car's door opened and Officer Blake Carter stepped out, tall, white, jaw clenched, the brim of his cap low over his eyes. The officer's body language was loud before he said a word, shoulders squared, hand resting just a little too comfortably near his holster. Zohran paused on the sidewalk, a file folder still tucked under his arm, and felt a small knot tighten in his stomach. "Stay and watch," something inside him whispered. Amir rolled down his window, swallowing hard. "Good evening, officer," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Did I do something wrong?" Carter approached with the slow, deliberate swagger of someone who wanted the whole street to see who was in charge. "License and registration," he barked, ignoring the question. Amir fumbled for his wallet, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline. "Can you tell me why I was stopped?" he tried again, more quietly. Carter's lip curled. "You match a description," he said. It was a phrase so vague it could swallow any man with a beard and brown skin. As Amir shifted to reach the glove compartment, Carter's hand slid fully onto his gun. Slowly, the officer snapped. "Keep your hands where I can see them." From the sidewalk, Zohran saw the moment the scene turned. The officer's stance changed, legs planted wider, torso angled, eyes narrowed. The space between them crackled with something ugly, not just suspicion, but contempt. A couple of pedestrians slowed, sensing tension, but hurried on. No one wanted to be part of whatever this was becoming. Amir froze, hands hovering in midair. The world outside the car blurred, all he saw now was the officer's fingers edging toward the weapon at his hip. Fear shot through him, hot and paralyzing. In the reflection of the sedan's windshield, Zohran saw Carter's hand move, thumb brushing the snap of the holster. And that was the instant he understood, this was no longer a routine stop. This was a moment that could tilt, in a heartbeat, into tragedy. He felt his pulse slam in his ears as a single thought carved itself into his mind: if I don't act now, I might be watching a man die. "Step out of the vehicle." Officer Carter's voice cut through the street like a blade. His hand was already gripping the pistol, the black steel glinting under the streetlight. Amir froze. His brain screamed to comply, but his body wouldn't move. "Sir, I didn't do anything," he stammered, voice cracking. The officer advanced, weapon raised, eyes wide with something more dangerous than rage, fear. "Don't move." Carter barked again. Passers-by turned, stopped, then retreated when they saw the gun. A mother pulled her child away, muttering under her breath. One man took out his phone to record, his hands trembling. From across the street, Zohran's heartbeat roared in his ears. He's going to shoot him, he thought. Instinct drowned out reason. He dropped his folder, stepped off the curb, and crossed the street before his mind could stop him. "Officer!" Zohran shouted, his voice slicing through the chaos. The officer flinched, startled. "Lower your weapon." Zohran commanded, his tone sharp, unyielding, the kind that fills halls of power. Carter turned, confusion flashing across his face. "Step back, sir. This is police business." "This is public business," Zohran shot back, moving closer. "That man's hands are up. You're pointing a gun at an unarmed citizen." The officer's jaw tightened. He matched the suspect description. "So do half the men in this city after sunset," Zohran replied. His voice didn't shake. His eyes locked with the officer's. "You're escalating, and everyone's watching. Lower it, now." Phones were out everywhere now, recording, streaming, whispering. The crowd's tension rippled like static. The weight of their gazes pressed on Carter's uniform heavier than his bulletproof vest. For the first time, doubt flickered in his stance. He looked from Zohran to Amir, who still stood motionless beside the car, hands raised, breath shallow. "Sir, please," Amir said softly. "My wife's expecting me home." The humanity in that sentence cracked something open. Carter hesitated. His grip loosened. Then, slowly, the gun dipped downward. The crowd exhaled collectively, the air filling again with sound and life. Amir dropped his hands, eyes wet with disbelief. Zohran stepped between them, palms open, calm but firm. "You just made the right choice," he said to the officer quietly, his tone stripped of accusation. "Don't undo it." Carter said nothing, his face pale, sweat beading along his temple. He holstered the weapon, muttered into his radio, and backed toward his car. The onlookers erupted, not in applause, but in raw, shaken murmurs. Zohran turned to Amir, who looked like a man who'd just survived the impossible. "You're safe now," he said, though his own heart still thundered. Amir's voice broke as he whispered, "I thought I'd never see my family again." Zohran placed a hand on his shoulder. "You will," he said. "And the world's going to see this too." Because as he looked up, a dozen phones were still pointed their way, and he knew this moment, once posted, would travel far beyond 34th Street. By morning, the city was awake, not to the sound of traffic, but to the sound of outrage. The video, shaky but crystal clear in its message, had spread across every platform overnight. Millions had already watched it, a police officer with his gun drawn on an unarmed Muslim man, and the calm, commanding voice of a man off camera saying, "Lower your weapon." Everyone's watching. By sunrise, someone had identified him, Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. Hashtags multiplied like wildfire, hashtag lower your weapon, hashtag decency in action, hashtag justice on 34th. For some, it was proof that courage still existed in politics. For others, it was a threat to the fragile comfort of denial. Cable news shows played it in loops, voices overlapping, each trying to claim the meaning of what had unfolded in those tense, breathless seconds. At a small apartment in Astoria, Amir Rahim sat with his wife Iman, staring at their TV in stunned silence. The video replayed his terror again and again, but this time, he wasn't invisible. The world could see what he had endured, and who had stood between him and death. "He saved you," Iman whispered, her hand trembling as she touched his face. "He didn't even know you." Amir nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "He saw me," he finally said. "That's all I ever wanted." Outside, reporters were already gathering, knocking on doors, asking for the man from the video. His phone vibrated nonstop, journalists, strangers, relatives he hadn't heard from in years. Everyone wanted a piece of his pain, but all he wanted was quiet. Meanwhile, in a modest Queens office stacked with folders and coffee cups, Zohran's team was in chaos. The phone rang nonstop, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, every outlet demanding comment. Some praised him as a hero. Others accused him of interfering with police work. "You can't ignore this," said one of his aides. "The city's watching." But Zohran sat silent, watching the video again, not as a politician, but as a human being. He saw his own reflection in the footage, composed, firm, but underneath it, fear. Not fear of the officer, fear of failing, fear that if he hadn't spoken in that moment, the man on the screen would be a memory instead of a headline. "This isn't about me," he said finally. "It's about what's normal, and what should never be normal again." By nightfall, the police department had issued a brief statement: "We are reviewing the incident on 34th Street. The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave." It was the language of bureaucracy, sterile, bloodless. But beneath it, something was shifting. Across the city, rallies began forming. Mosque leaders called for accountability. College students printed posters of Zohran's face with the words, "One voice can stop a bullet." Even some officers, quietly and anonymously, shared the clip with the caption, "He did what we should have done." The moment had escaped the news cycle, it had become a movement. And though Zohran didn't seek fame, he felt the weight of it pressing down on his conscience. Because he knew the world didn't change from one video, it changed from what came after. It took less than 48 hours for the celebration to turn into a storm. The same networks that had praised Zohran Mamdani for his courage under pressure now aired segments questioning his reckless interference. Political pundits debated whether he had endangered the officer's safety. Police unions issued statements accusing him of grandstanding for cameras. And behind closed doors, city officials whispered the word that always follows integrity: liability. What had begun as an act of conscience was being reframed as an act of defiance. "You embarrassed the department," one official told him in a tense meeting. "You made us look weak." Zohran met his gaze evenly. "No," he said. "I made us look human. You just forgot what that looks like." That night, the threat started. Anonymous messages flooded his phone, slurs, warnings, even photos of his office building taken from across the street. "You'll regret protecting that terrorist," one text read. He'd expected the hate, but what cut deeper was the silence of his colleagues. Some who'd once called him brother now avoided him in hallways. The party leadership issued a statement distancing itself from his personal actions. His own staff fielded calls from donors pulling funding. To the public, he was either a saint or a villain. To the establishment, he was a problem to be contained. But Zohran refused to retreat. "If they can weaponize fear," he told his assistant, "then I can weaponize truth." Across the city, the Rahims were living their own nightmare. Strangers camped outside their building, cameras flashing every time they stepped out. Amir lost his job when his employer said he had become too controversial. Iman found hate mail slipped under their door. One night, when their baby cried at the sound of sirens, Amir's hands shook with helplessness. He called Zohran at midnight. "I never wanted this," he said. "You gave me my life back, but now everyone wants to take it apart." Zohran listened in silence, guilt tightening around his chest. "I'll fix this," he said finally. "I promise." But even as he said it, he knew promises couldn't stop the machine he had set in motion. The next morning, Zohran arrived at the Capitol to find his name trending again, not as a hero, but as a security concern. Someone had leaked a distorted video clip showing only the moment he stepped toward Officer Carter, edited to make him look aggressive. The title read, "Assemblyman Threatens Officer." It spread like wildfire. Within hours, angry crowds gathered outside his office. Reporters demanded he step down. "They've rewritten the story," his aide said, trembling. "They've made you the villain." Zohran looked out the window at the crowd chanting his name, half in support, half in rage, and whispered, "Then it's time I remind them what the real story was." Because in a world that feeds on distortion, telling the truth had become the most dangerous act of all. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. The invitation letter had used the word inquiry, but everyone knew what it meant, a public shaming. Cameras lined the marble hallway of City Hall, their lenses aimed like rifles as Zohran Mamdani stepped through the doors. He wore no tie, no entourage, just the quiet conviction of a man who refused to perform remorse. Inside, the chamber was packed. Committee members sat in a semicircle, faces carved from stone. In the front row sat Amir and Iman Rahim, hands clasped, their presence both a comfort and a burden. To the right, Officer Blake Carter sat stiffly in uniform, eyes fixed forward, his lawyer whispering in his ear. The room buzzed with tension. When the chair banged the gavel, silence fell like a curtain. "Assemblyman Mamdani," began the chairwoman, her voice smooth but sharp. "Do you acknowledge that by approaching a police officer during an active stop, you violated protocol and potentially endangered public safety?" Zohran leaned toward the microphone. "I acknowledge that I prevented an innocent man from being shot." Murmurs rippled through the audience. The chairwoman frowned. "This isn't a campaign speech. It's a statement of fact," Zohran said calmly. "Officer Carter's weapon was drawn on an unarmed driver who had done nothing wrong. I spoke because silence has killed too many before him." A committee member cut in, "You're not a trained officer." "No," Zohran replied. "But I am a trained human being. That should count for something." The questioning grew more aggressive. They dissected every second of the video, why he crossed the street, why he raised his voice, why he interfered. Carter's attorney painted him as reckless, unstable, even self-serving. "You saw a chance to play hero on camera," he accused. Zohran looked directly at him. "If saving a life is performance, then I hope every person watching learns the script." Gasps and scattered applause broke out before the gavel slammed again. The chairwoman's patience thinned. "This committee isn't interested in your moral theater," she said coldly. "Then maybe it should be," Zohran replied, his tone low but firm. "Because the theater outside this room is real, a city where men like Amir can't drive home without fearing the people meant to protect them." By the time the hearing adjourned, the crowd outside had doubled. Reporters shouted questions as Zohran exited, the air thick with flashbulbs and noise. A microphone was thrust toward him. "Assemblyman, do you regret confronting the officer?" He stopped, the Rahim standing just behind him. "Regret," he repeated, eyes steady. "I regret that a man with brown skin still needs a miracle to survive a traffic stop. I regret that doing the right thing is treated like a crime." He turned, gesturing toward Amir. "But I'll never regret choosing humanity over protocol." The quote spread across the city within an hour. Some called it defiance. Others called it leadership. But for Zohran, it was neither. It was survival, the refusal to let fear dictate who he became. That night, after the hearing ended, the city was still humming with arguments. Talk shows dissected every sentence, politicians lined up on either side of the story, and social media burned with fury and admiration alike. But inside a small police precinct in Queens, Officer Blake Carter sat alone in a dim interrogation room, not as the interrogator this time, but as the haunted. His gun and badge lay on the metal table in front of him, their reflections trembling in the fluorescent light. He hadn't gone home since the hearing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene replaying in a brutal loop, the man's trembling hands, the assemblyman's voice shouting, "Lower your weapon," and the sickening realization that, for 1 second, he'd wanted to pull the trigger. The door opened, and his partner, Officer Jensen, stepped in. "They're saying you'll be cleared," he said softly. "Internal Affairs doesn't want more heat. They'll call it a misunderstanding." Carter didn't respond. He was staring at his own hands, flexing them as if trying to convince himself they still belonged to him. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. "That's what they call it when we nearly kill someone who didn't deserve it." Jensen frowned. "You did your job." "No," Carter said flatly. "I did what fear taught me to do." His voice cracked. "And I almost became the headline I swore I'd never be." He pushed the gun across the table, its scrape echoing. "I don't deserve to wear this anymore." 2 days later, as Zohran was leaving his office, a uniformed figure stood waiting by the door. For a split second, his body tensed, expecting confrontation. But Carter simply removed his cap. "I need a word," he said quietly. They stepped aside into the cold evening air, away from cameras. "You could have humiliated me," the officer said, eyes hollow. "You could have called for my firing. But you didn't." Zohran steadied him, unsure where this was going. "I didn't need another villain," he said. "I needed you to see what you were about to become." Carter nodded slowly. "I did. And I can't unsee it." He swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to the man I aimed at. And to his family. The next day, under no press or fanfare, Carter walked into the Rahim's bakery with Zohran by his side. Iman froze behind the counter, Amir's hand stiffened around a tray of bread. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Carter removed his badge and placed it on the counter. I came to say I'm sorry, he said quietly. No cameras. No excuses. I saw you as a threat when you were just a man trying to get home. The bakery was silent except for the hum of the ovens. Amir looked at him, really looked, and saw not the monster from his nightmares, but a man stripped bare of pride. You were wrong, Amir said softly. But you came back. That's something. Carter nodded, eyes wet. You saved me, too, he said. Because that day, if I had pulled that trigger, I would have lost everything human in me. And for the first time, the three men, the victim, the witness, and the almost perpetrator, stood together not as enemies, but as proof that truth, when faced head-on, can still heal what hatred breaks. By dawn, word of the private apology had leaked, not through media or press releases, but through whispers. A bakery customer had seen the unlikely meeting, recognized Zohran Mamdani, and posted a brief message online. The officer came to say sorry. No cameras. Just truth. Within hours, it went viral. The image of accountability without spectacle shook the city more than any speech or protest could. Some called it weakness. Others called it redemption. But for the political elite, it was chaos. If forgiveness could steal headlines from outrage, if reconciliation could outshine punishment, then their entire system, built on fear and division, might crumble. That afternoon, Zohran received a call from a number he didn't recognize. Assemblyman, the voice said, low and authoritative, we need to talk, privately. The meeting was set for midnight, in a government building usually dark after hours. When he arrived, three men were waiting, city officials, faces familiar from campaign photos and closed-door sessions. They didn't waste time with greetings. You're destabilizing the narrative, one said. You're turning a case of misconduct into a morality play. Another leaned forward. Do you understand the risk of what you're doing? You're making people believe the system can change from within. That's not how this city works. Zohran's jaw tightened. Maybe that's the problem, he said. It should. The oldest of the three, a man who'd survived decades of political storms, sighed. You're young, idealistic. That's admirable. But you're playing with power structures older than you can imagine. People need villains and heroes, not nuance. If they see the cop and the victim shake hands, who will they hate? Who will they fear? And without fear, how do we govern? Zohran's voice was calm but dangerous. You don't govern people through fear. You govern through faith. The official's eyes narrowed. Faith doesn't fund elections. The room went still. It was the quiet acknowledgement of everything broken. Zohran rose from his chair, looking at each man in turn. You called me here to silence me, he said. But I'm done speaking your language. If telling the truth shakes your system, maybe it deserves to fall. He turned toward the door, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. One of the men called after him, voice sharp with warning, if you keep this up, you'll lose everything. Zohran paused at the threshold. Then I'll lose it telling the truth, he said without looking back. Outside, the cold air bit at his face, but it felt clean, purer than the air inside those walls. He knew what would come next, leaks, smears, attempts to destroy his name. But for the first time in weeks, he wasn't afraid. Because fear, he realized, was exactly what they needed him to feel. And courage, real courage, is what they could never control. The retaliation came faster than even Zohran expected. Within a week, headlines erupted with scandal, assemblymen accused of obstructing police investigation, leaked documents tie Mamdani to political misconduct. Every network ran the story, each adding their own spin, their own carefully sharpened words. The timing was too perfect, the evidence too thin. He knew this wasn't coincidence, it was orchestration. An old trick of power: when you can't kill the truth, you poison the man who speaks it. His team tried to defend him, but the noise was deafening. Overnight, donors vanished, allies went silent, and his inbox filled with resignation demands. "They're trying to bury you," his aide whispered. Zohran stared at the screen, calm but pale. "Then they'll have to dig through the truth to do it." The smear campaign worked like wildfire. Social media turned brutal. Photos of him beside Amir and Iman were twisted into conspiracy memes: foreign sympathizer, traitor in office. Even the bakery where the apology had taken place was vandalized. A shattered window, a slur scrawled in red spray paint: traitor's bread. Amir called him that night, his voice shaking. "They won't stop, Zohran. They think I planned this with you." "You didn't," Zohran said firmly. "You told the truth, that's all." "And look what truth costs," Amir snapped, before hanging up. For the first time, Zohran sat in the dark, feeling the cold weight of isolation. His courage had set the world on fire, but now, he was standing in the ashes alone. Then, one morning, as he left his apartment, he found a note pinned to his door. It was handwritten, ink-smudged, no signature: "They can't burn a flame that lives in others." Beneath it was a flash drive. He hesitated, then took it inside and played it. The screen flickered to life with grainy footage, security camera footage, showing a man in a dark suit handing envelopes to a news producer. The timestamps matched the week of his scandal. The evidence was clear: the smear campaign had been manufactured. He felt adrenaline surge through his veins. Someone on the inside had turned. Someone wanted him to fight back. "Then I will," he whispered, his hands trembling not from fear, but from purpose reignited. That evening, Zohran walked into a small community center in Queens where hundreds had gathered: students, workers, parents, imams, priests, people who had seen the lies and refused to believe them. When he stepped onto the small stage, the room fell silent. "They tried to make me the enemy," he began, his voice low but steady. "But the real enemy is the fear that keeps good people quiet. If truth can be silenced with lies, then none of us are safe. But if we speak, together, they can't erase us all." The crowd rose, applause swelling like thunder. Outside, cameras waited again, but this time, the story had slipped from the hands of those who'd written it. Because fire, once set loose, cannot be controlled. And that night, Zohran Mamdani didn't just defend his name, he rekindled a movement. The next morning, the city woke to the kind of news that no spin doctor could bury. A young independent journalist named Leila Torres, tired of watching injustice disguised as politics, had published a 3-minute exposé titled "They Tried to Silence Zohran Mamdani." It opened with the grainy footage from the flash drive, the same one Zohran had found pinned to his door, showing a city official handing envelopes of cash to a media producer, followed by emails coordinating the smear campaign against him. The story hit every major platform within an hour. It was irrefutable, undeniable, and devastating. Within minutes, hashtags flipped: hashtag resign the corrupt, hashtag justice for Zohran, hashtag truth has no party. The establishment scrambled. Politicians who had condemned him 2 days earlier suddenly clarified their positions. Networks that had mocked his integrity were now calling the scandal deeply concerning. The very people who had orchestrated his downfall were turning on one another like wolves. "You just destroyed their whole machine," his aide said breathlessly, watching the news feeds light up. Zohran didn't smile. "No," he said quietly. "The truth did. I only helped it breathe." But as victory rippled through the streets, he felt something heavier than triumph: grief. Because he knew that for every man like him vindicated by evidence, there were thousands who never got a camera, a witness, or a second chance. That night, he appeared at a televised press conference, not to gloat, but to speak. The room was packed, microphones clustered like a crown of thorns around the podium. "What you saw this week wasn't just corruption," he began. "It was fear of a city learning to love justice more than comfort. They wanted you to see me as a threat, because they know that courage is contagious. But look around you, we've already won. Not because I stood up, but because you did. His words weren't shouted, they were steady, humble, and undeniable. For once, the cameras didn't distort. They listened. Meanwhile, in their small bakery, Amir and Iman Rahim watched the broadcast in silence. Their window had been repaired, their sign repainted. Their daughter slept upstairs, her tiny breaths a lullaby against the noise of the world. He kept his promise, Iman said softly. Amir nodded, eyes glistening. He didn't just protect me, he murmured. He protected what's left of decency. Outside, in neighborhoods across the city, people lit candles again, the same way they had months earlier when the first video went viral. But this time, it wasn't an outrage. It was ingratitude. A symbol that truth, when defended without hatred, could still light the dark corners of power. The trial began on a gray Monday morning that felt heavy with history. Outside the courthouse, barricades divided two oceans of humanity. On one side, those chanting Zohran Mamdani's name, holding signs that read truth has no party and one voice can stop a bullet. On the other, a smaller but louder crowd waving flags, shouting that he'd humiliated the system. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Reporters filled every seat, cameras hummed like insects, and the accused, 3 senior city officials and a media producer, sat at the defense table in polished suits, faces carved into masks of arrogance. Zohran took his seat behind the prosecution bench, not as a politician now, but as a witness, a living reminder of how truth, once unleashed, could drag even the powerful into the light. When the footage from the flash drive was played for the first time in court, the room fell silent. The pixelated video flickered across the screen, envelopes of money, whispered orders, the exchange of lies. The defendants shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor, Leila Torres, the same journalist who had broken the story, had been appointed as special counsel for transparency. Her voice didn't tremble. This, she said, pointing at the screen, is what fear looks like when it wears a suit. And this, she gestured toward Zohran, is what courage looks like when it refuses to kneel. Gasps rippled through the gallery. For once, the courtroom wasn't about politics, it was about conscience. During cross-examination, one of the officials broke. Under pressure, he admitted that the smear campaign had been ordered from higher up, a desperate attempt to neutralize Zohran before his message of reconciliation could spread. They said people like him make us weak, the man muttered. That forgiveness kills control. When asked who gave the order, he hesitated, glancing at the cameras before whispering, "You already know their names." It was enough. The dominoes began to fall. One confession led to another, and by the end of the week, an entire network of corruption lay exposed. The city watched in disbelief as the empire of deceit it had once trusted crumbled in real time. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, there were no cheers from Zohran. He simply exhaled, feeling the years of weight slide from his shoulders. Reporters swarmed him as he stepped into the sunlight. "Assemblyman, what do you want to say to those who tried to destroy you?" one shouted. Zohran paused, his face calm, his words measured. "I forgive them," he said. "Because if we want a better city, someone has to be the first to stop the cycle of hate." The crowd went still. It wasn't the answer they expected. But as those words echoed across the steps, a quiet truth sank in. Forgiveness was not weakness, it was rebellion against the world's oldest weapon. And in that moment, under the eyes of the nation, Zohran Mamdani didn't just win a trial. He redefined what victory meant. The morning after the verdict, the city didn't awaken to celebration, it awakened to reflection. The news anchors spoke softly for once. The headlines, stripped of noise, carried a simple truth: he forgave them. That phrase traveled faster than any scandal ever had. Churches rang their bells. Mosques opened their doors. Synagogues lit candles. Across faiths and boroughs, people felt something rare, the tremor of shared conscience. Within days, communities began organizing what they called the Dawn March. It wasn't a protest, nor a rally, it was an act of gratitude, a public vow to choose compassion over contempt. For once, New York prepared not for outrage, but for healing. On the morning of the march, the sky over the city was pale gold, the air cold enough to make breath visible. From every direction, people came, teachers and taxi drivers, construction workers and students, rabbis walking beside imams, priests beside atheists. Some carried lanterns, others loaves of bread, a symbol borrowed from Amir and Iman's bakery, now known simply as the place where apologies happened. As the sun began to rise, the crowd moved silently down Fifth Avenue. No chants. No slogans. Just footsteps, thousands of them, echoing in rhythm. Above the skyline, drones captured the image that would soon circle the world, a river of light flowing through the city that once tried to divide itself. At the front of the march walked Zohran Mamdani, flanked by Amir and Iman, their hands clasped together. The officer, Blake Carter, walked a few paces behind, out of uniform, his eyes down but unashamed. Cameras followed him, but no one jeered. Forgiveness had made him untouchable in a different way. As they reached the steps of City Hall, the crowd stopped. Zohran turned to face them, not as a politician, not as a hero, but as a man humbled by what courage had created. He raised his voice, steady but tender. "We began with a gun pointed at an innocent man," he said. "And today, we stand with hands open to one another. This is what happens when compassion refuses to die." The crowd stood silent, many crying, others smiling through tears. Then, something extraordinary happened. Amir stepped forward, holding a basket of bread still warm from the oven. He began handing it to the people near him, strangers, officers, reporters, breaking the loaves in half and sharing them. Soon, the gesture spread down the steps, through the avenue, until thousands were passing pieces of bread to one another, murmuring words of peace in 100 languages. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't led. It was human. And as the first light of dawn touched the crowd, Zohran felt the moment settle into history, not as a victory, but as a promise. One born from fear, redeemed by courage, and carried forward by faith that kindness, once awakened, could never again be silenced. The next day, New York felt different. The noise was still there, taxis honking, trains screeching, vendors shouting, but beneath it pulsed a quiet harmony. Something unspoken had settled into the city's rhythm, a stillness born not of silence but of understanding. Newspapers ran the same headline across languages and boroughs, "The March That Healed the City." Overnight, the footage of strangers sharing bread had crossed borders. From London to Lahore, Cairo to Chicago, crowds gathered in mimicry, walking at dawn, holding lanterns, passing bread hand to hand. What began as a spark on 34th Street had become a flame reaching every corner of the world. In the middle of it all, Zohran Mamdani sat at his small kitchen table, sipping tea as the morning light spilled across the newspaper folded in front of him. The article wasn't about him anymore, it was about them. The people. The city. The movement. For once, his face wasn't on the front page. Instead, a photograph of two children, one wearing a hijab, the other a police cadet's cap, holding hands beneath the headline "Decency is Louder." He smiled softly, tracing the image with his fingers. He had lost his position, his comfort, his safety. But what he gained was something no office could give, a city that remembered what humanity looked like. Later that afternoon, he visited Amir and Iman's bakery. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, sweet and familiar. "You're early," Iman teased. "Or maybe I'm late to peace," Zohran replied with a grin. Amir wiped flour from his hands. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked, half hopeful, half afraid. Zohran looked out the window at the bustling street, people holding doors for one another, strangers sharing smiles. "Nothing perfect ever lasts," he said. "But sometimes it doesn't have to. Sometimes, all we need is the memory that kindness worked once, so it can work again." Amir nodded quietly, understanding. They stood together in silence, the scent of bread mixing with the hum of life outside, a reminder that revolutions don't always roar, sometimes they rise like morning light. That evening, as dusk returned to the city he loved, Zohran walked alone to the same corner of 34th Street where it had all begun. The streetlights flickered on, washing the pavement in amber glow. For a moment, he closed his eyes and heard the echoes, the fear, the shouting, the moment he chose to step forward. Now, the air was calm, filled with nothing but the sound of passing cars and laughter from a nearby cafe. He smiled. "We made it," he whispered to no one in particular. Then, turning toward the fading light, he added softly, "And we'll keep making it, one act of decency at a time." The city didn't answer, but in its endless hum, he felt it listening. If you made it this far, subscribe, leave your like, and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you, and see you next time.